Okay, the winning strategy is not to make a mistake, because there's going to be things that happen that you don't have control over. You can't control when a COVID-19 happens. You can't control, when the real estate bubble is going to pop or when the tech wreck is going to pop. Okay, people say valuation. Well, valuation is great, but markets are wrong longer than you're liquid. The long-term investment game is to fully recognize the consequences of mistakes, given what you're going to do on your strategy. And if you're okay with them, with being that kind of wrong, if you're okay with being wrong, then you can proceed. Okay, because we're not going to worry about what happens when you're right. When you're right, everything is fine. Everybody gets paid. What happens when you're wrong? Right? That's going to be the critical factor. Don't blow up. To win the game, you got to stay in the game.
Hey, it's Rocky. Welcome to Richer Soul. Today's guest is my friend David Liu, who's a Chinese immigrant and a chartered financial analyst. We're going to chat about China and the markets. Imagine it's 12 months from now, and you've achieved your major life goals. How does it feel to be in the best shape of your life, to wake up energized, excited about the day, to have great relationships and friends who support you and propel you forward? How does it feel to have an excess of money, to be able to make the choices you want, to be fearless and open to trying new adventures? Imagine being connected to the universe and it providing everything you desire. It's possible over time, and your past does not dictate your future. The only thing holding you back from this vision is you. It's time to take control of our thoughts and use them to our advantage. Welcome to Richer Soul, where we achieve our dreams and bring balance to health, wealth, relationships, time, and spirituality. If you have not had a chance to listen to episodes 1 through 9, I encourage you to go back and listen to the framework behind Richer Soul and how to create the life of your dreams. You can also find all the show notes for this episode at richersoul.com. While you're there, you can sign up for a monthly email where I share the best articles I read this month, let you know about upcoming episodes, and share a little wisdom. You can also listen to coaching calls under the Coaching Calls tab. I also share the most interesting articles I read every week on Facebook at facebook.com/Richer Soul. And there's also a Facebook group where you can ask questions and interact with other listeners. Today's quote comes from Isaac Asimov. Things do change. The only question is that since things are deteriorating so quickly, will society and man's habits change quickly enough? Wow, that's an important question for our current times. We can influence society and we can change. Question is, are you doing that? What are you doing differently these days? We're going to talk about that from an economic standpoint. But before we do, let's review last week's action step, which was to find something to make you happy today. I've been working on doing that, both through a course I'm taking on well-being and also by slowing down and just enjoying the moment. What have you done to make yourself happy? As we've learned on this show and through my experiences, money is not going to make you happy. Sure, it may get you out of misery. We also need to remember that we can't wait for fill in the blank to be happy. You have to enjoy the journey and be in that moment. Today, we have my friend David Liu on the show. David and I get into deep discussions on the intricacy of our economic systems, the recent Fed actions, and how we expect markets to perform. He has an interesting history, and we tend to spend hours having these conversations. I thought it would be nice to have you join some of them and get some of the highlights of what we talk about. David Liu is an investment manager in South Central PA. His personal mission is to financially empower people and institutions, combining personalized attention and analytical rigor. David crafts and deploys customized strategies to help investors build and protect what's most important. David serves in various capacities for numerous community organizations and teaches at local universities. David holds a master's degree in electrical engineering from Tufts and an MBA from Boston University. He's also a CFA charter holder. In his spare time, he hangs out with his family and works in the garden. Let's meet my friend David. Welcome to Rich Your Soul, David Liu. It's great to have you join us today.
It is a pleasure to be here, Rocky. Thank you for the opportunity.
And I'm excited for the conversation. We've been having many of these conversations over the last couple of months, and I thought I would really like to share it with my audience.
Well, I'd love to be here. I greatly enjoy our conversations, Rocky. As I said, that is typically the highlight of my week.
So let's start at the beginning. What was it like when you were growing up, and how much did your family and school teach you about money?
Yeah, that's a really complicated question because, as you know, I'm a first-generation Chinese immigrant, and the funny thing is, given my unique Chinese background, and I will say so unique that my family was very close to what I call the 49 dynasty. Okay, my grandfather was the head of the Chinese secret police and the head of the Chinese military from 1949 to 1959. Okay, and people who are sinologists and Chinese scholars immediately recognize that is a very unusual setup. But I would just say that he's something like the, I guess the Colin Powell equivalent, okay, in China. But because China is an autocracy and is an ancient society, he was both responsible for sort of the foreign threats to the state and also the domestic threats to the state at the same time. America believed in institutions and the Constitution and, laws. The Chinese only believe in the cult of personality. That is the only way that society has organized itself, for the past 7,000 years. So when I was growing up, money to me wasn't really presented in any sort of remotely the same concept as it is in America today, or any time. And quite frankly, the concept of money, because there really wasn't a concept of capital when I was growing up, only the concept of power, as in political power, and the ability to control the means of production. I mean, everybody knows that China is at the time when I was growing up, okay, which was the early 80s, which is when China was just beginning to open up to the Western world. So the way that money was presented to me, it wasn't explicitly said, but it was, and because I'm essentially can be considered a sort of an exiled Chinese aristocrat. It was just a means to exercise power. And it had no quote unquote economic value. But for me, economics and political power was wrapped up in one concept. So it's very different than sort of the understanding of the market economy, if you will, or the resemblance of a market economy that everybody in the West is used to. It was very different. Okay, it was very different. Does that does that help?
It does. So what happened?
Well, what happened? So if you can look this up, okay, you can look this up. What happened was that I came to America. It's kind of a fluke. Okay, I have my personal story. So China was just beginning to open up to the Western world. This was like before globalization was a term. Okay, this was like 1981. Okay, this was like the last years of the Reagan administration. So the Chinese are kind of coming out, okay, into the global stage, if you will, and America knew nothing about China because Nixon went to China like in the 70s, right? it was always China, the mainland China, Beijing, didn't quote unquote exist. Okay, China was Taiwan. That was the official statement from the West until Nixon went to China and restored, what have you, reinitiated diplomatic relationships. So here it is, the global power of the United States and this mysterious massive land that's China in East Asia. And nobody knew anything about one another, okay, quote unquote. The Chinese didn't know anything about the Americans, and the Americans certainly didn't know or didn't really want to know until that point about the Chinese because, we're all supposed to be communist. Okay, communist was a capital C. But to be sure, from within, I'll tell you from within the, for an insider observer, okay, China's not communist. China are Chinese. Okay, we can get to that later. So from the perspective of the Americans, it was like, okay, what is this China business, and really, what is this Beijing business? Because at the time, if you think about, in history, China, Red China, Beijing and America had a spat over Korea, right? So that's what kind of soured the situation. And then China was looking to Moscow for guidance. And then there was, a spat with the Soviets. So Beijing and Moscow was distancing. And, in the 80s, the Soviets was making a push into Afghanistan. So it was natural for the Americans to think that, hey, if we can sort of, get the Chinese, get Beijing onto our side because they're having a spat with the Soviets anyways, maybe we can get another ally in East Asia. So at the end of the Reagan administration, the Secretary of Defense, quote unquote, sold a kind of a project to the Chinese, okay, and Congress approved it. And you can look this up. It's called the Peace Pearl Project. Essentially, the Americans was going to install a Northrop Grumman fire control radar system, an obsolete one, okay, into a Chinese domestically produced MiG, okay, as a gesture of goodwill. Okay, it was a joint defense project. Okay, between the American Air Force and the Chinese PLA Air Force. And, being from, having the personal connection, the Chinese are dynastic, right? Having such a personal connection to the, highest level of the Chinese government. My father was selected to head that project. At the time, he was, I guess he was. Functionally, he was a high-ranking officer in the Chinese Air Force, and his job was to actually, quote unquote, procure all of the equipment for the PLA Air Force. Okay, which basically means, according, we say in Chinese, anything that left the ground 2 feet, that's the realm of the Air Force. So that's like everything from, hovercrafts to strategic bombers. Okay, so those are, and his department was responsible for procurement of all of the equipment. So this was a major project, and I can't remember what the dollar figure attached to the project is at the time. I can't remember whether it's 50 million or 500 million. But it was a substantial amount of money in 1980, in the 1980s. Okay. So this project was approved. And by the time, this project was being executed on, it was Bush Sr.'s government. So my dad and a group and his team of, I guess, the most elite of the Chinese Air Force people, everybody from engineers to test pilots, okay, came, and plopped down in Dayton, Ohio, right next to Wright-Patterson Air Force Base, okay, and started working on this project. And in the summer of 1987, my mom said to me, "Hey, how do you like to go visit Dad on your summer break?" I'm like, "Oh yeah, learn some English, go to America for a couple of months, see what's like. Great, it's a great little experience." So I came with my mom with the intention of visiting my dad for, just a couple of months and learning a few English. Just learning a little English. And, that's how I came to America in the summer of 87. And, one thing led to another. Okay. There was, without going into the over details of it, because I can go on and on about this. Essentially what happened was that, when you're when you're close to the government of an autocracy, political purges are happening left and right. There's always happening. Okay. So you're either, purging somebody or getting purged by somebody. Okay. So my family was purged 2 or 3 times. Okay. At the time, my extended family, my grandparents, my parents. So when this particular purge came down, we could spot it from a mile away. And what threw sort of a monkey wrench into the evolution of events was the Tiananmen Square incident of 1989. That was something that nobody could have foreseen. That was, from an insider, I would just say that because, my family is so closely attached to the Chinese military, it was surprising to us too. And that was the point where, because my family has always been quote unquote loyal to the emperor. Okay. That was the point where we realized that the regime was unsustainable. Because there's a different, when you start rolling tanks and shooting your own people, that's kind of that was the line. And at that, so 1989 happened, Tiananmen Square happened, of which event you still cannot talk about this event in China. Okay, like if you try to say June 4th, 1989, like secret police going to show up and pay you a visit. Okay. And there's literally no mention of it. And a lot of Chinese people actually does not know this event existed because the powerful Chinese state always wielded its control of the media. And that's one of the critical ways that particular regime can maintain power. Okay. They must have the power to control the narrative. So that event happened, and my family scattered. Okay. My father was able to, essentially resign because he was still a general in the Chinese army, PLA, it's called the People's Liberation Army. And then it's the various branches. So he was still a general in the PLA. So, you can't quit the PLA. So there was some, very intriguing maneuvering that he did such that he could, quote unquote, quit the PLA, able to essentially, leave China, okay, exit Chinese jurisdiction. My mom and I were kind of stuck in America at the time. But luckily, when he came to America, he had an A1 visa as diplomat. My mom and I had A2 visas. Okay, those were families of diplomats, and and type A visas don't expire. So long as we didn't leave American jurisdiction, we were legally staying in America. And after 1989, there was the Chinese Student Protection Act that Clinton became president at that point. And I traded my diplomatic immunity for a green card. I didn't even know that I had diplomatic immunity. So that's how I got here. And I think the number is maybe 60,000 Chinese diasporas got to America the same way. Because when tanks started rolling down the street of Beijing, it was a sign that maybe you shouldn't be going back. So yeah, that's the story. That's in a nutshell how I became an American, which actually I quite love it. Trust me, with perspective that I have, the grass is very green on this side of the wall.
And that's what I'd like to talk about next. I think a lot of people, that's a fascinating story of backstory, I think a lot of people today look at China as this massive monster that is taking over the world. But yet you're saying that the grass is not greener on that side. I'd love to get your perspective on what is the Chinese economy truly like today, and how do they fit into this global stage?
Yeah. Well, gosh, let's step back a little bit and talk about how people are organized into society. Okay. Because I am fortunate enough to not only be bilingual, I'm actually bicultural. And anyone who is bicultural will probably back me up when I say this, that, think about the state that, there are many different ways to organize society. Okay. And they all kind of work, but, work, I have to put, quotation around work, because depending on how you organize, you tend to have, things that you're good at and things that you're not good at. Okay. The benefits and costs of society. And I've lived in both sides. So it's very difficult at this point to kind of, because most people, is only used to what they're used to. And, it's difficult to imagine, taking on a completely different set of cultural values and, having a completely different perspective, completely different perspective on reality, really. To give you an example, okay, language, all right. Americans are very, American thinks that rights are very important. Okay. And if I say the word right as in human rights, and if you're an American, you would immediately think about a set of concepts. Okay. Now, in the Chinese language, the English word for rights, as in human rights, okay, maps onto a character. Okay, a glyph, if you will, a geometric shape. The problem is that the English word for power, as in political power, as in I have the power to dominate over you, okay, also maps the same character. So there you have there you have 2 billion people running around, and they don't distinguish linguistically between power and right. So how do you think they are going to react, when they're questioned about rights? They're going to think that you're telling them about power, or rather, whatever it is that they have in their mind, it's confounded into the same geometric shape. Okay. So right there, that's it's a very different way of organizing. Okay, think about a society where you don't distinguish the difference between power and right. Okay, and what are the implications for that, right? So why is the grass greener in America? Well, to begin with, the language is English, and English supports the difference between the concept of power and right. And that's little simple fundamental tokens of culture and language has profound effects on how the legal system is organized, how the capital markets are organized, right? And the funny thing is, okay, I say the grass is green here. Because people are free, okay, and Americans or rather the rest of the world are looking at China as this massive economic monster that's quote unquote taking over the world. That in one sense is true, and in another is not, because think about what China is known for. Okay, China is the only culture that has built a wall that is visible from orbit. So if China had aspirations to take over the world, we all be speaking Chinese by now. Okay, we've been speaking Chinese for a couple thousand years. And if you look at world history, and as far as empires are concerned, okay, I mean, the Romans had an empire, right? The Egyptians had an empire. The Sumerians had an empire. Okay, the French had an empire. The British had an empire. Where are those empires now? Where are they?
They're all gone.
China was an empire. China is an empire. China is the only, I would say, I would submit to you that China is the last empire standing in the world.
Is America not an empire today?
Well, that is a very good question. Why do I say China is an empire? Because if you look at a Chinese currency, you're going to see that there are lots of different, the pictures of the Chinese currency, okay, the renminbi. Okay, I mean, Mao is on it. Okay, the face of Mao is on every single piece of Chinese currency. But you look at the back of it, okay, and the Chinese always content themselves to have many quote unquote ethnic minorities. Okay. Yeah, we have a lot of tribes in China. And, when I was growing up as kids, we were always told that, everybody is Chinese because everybody, we may not be able to understand each other when we speak. And the they call dialects. Okay, they're really languages. Okay, the dialects sound very different. Okay, but everybody write the same thing. We can read each other's language. Well, you know what? That is precisely the opposite of what it's supposed to be. Okay, whether or not you are a people, okay, you are considered to be a singular people, however you want to define it. The mark of that is that when you speak, you understand each other. Okay, that you speak the same language, not that you write the same language, because apparently any form of spoken language can be written in any type of phonetic system. So basically, I didn't believe it until I think Bosnian and Serbians was exactly the other way around, where when they talk, they understood each other, but they don't write the same language. And they were, in fact, the same people. The anthropologists said they're the same people. So you look at China, okay, we have, Mandarin. I'm Mandarin, okay? And then, we have Cantonese, which is south, okay? And then, we have Shanghainese, okay? And then there are countless other dialects, okay? And it's a function of the terrain, So sometimes China, the terrain is so harsh in China that you have two groups of people that can see each other, that can shout at each other, but they never shook hands with one another because they couldn't get to one another. And in fact, they spoke different languages. There are situations like that in China. I want to plug another one in for America, because I was really impressed with America recently. So 2020, the year of the census, right? I figure, hey, I want to sign up because, I want to be part of history. So if you ever signed up to be a census taker, you see that it'll ask you a lot of questions, right? And some of these are funny questions. It's like, what kind of transportation you have? First is like, do you have car? Okay, do you have access to public transportation? And then it asks you, okay, do you have a 4-wheel drive? And then it's like, do you have a boat? And then it's like, do you have a plane? So I'm like, okay, I guess some people are inaccessible. And then it was like, what kind of language do you speak? Do you speak any other language? So I'm like, oh yeah, of course, I'll check off Mandarin Chinese. So when they're Chinese and they're C. Okay, so the first line is Chinese Mandarin. Okay, so I click Mandarin, and then it was Cantonese. So I'm like, oh, and then I saw Shanghainese. I was like, okay, hey, it's pretty good. Americans knew that there are more than one dialect. And then what surprised me was that it showed up as like China dash, okay, the sub-dialect. And then the China dash sub-dialect kept going and going for like 2.5 inches in the box that, in the scroll box that came down. So at that point, I was kind of really surprised because so on record, okay, the Census Bureau marked something like, I don't know how many different Chinese subdialects was marked there. So I turned to my wife and I said, oh my God, in the census, everybody do count because there were dialects that I don't even recognize that I'm Chinese. So yeah, that's what defines an empire. Those people have absolutely no business being organized together. They get married differently, they eat different food, they bury their dead differently, and yet they pay homage to Beijing. So that's what makes it an empire. Okay. So is America an empire? Not entirely sure. Maybe, you would consider the Samoa Islands and Puerto Rico, all the protectorates part of the empire. Maybe, but it's certainly not the core of the heartland, right? I mean, you look at America, from sea to shining sea. Other than the American Indians, the First Nations, members of the First Nations, everybody is, pretty much an immigrant, right? So
they don't think they are.
Yes and no. Well, that's another conversation. But there's nobody here but us, right? we certainly weren't born here. America. I mean, let's just be serious, right? America got its start, on the back of genocide, just like many other countries. You came in here, you dominate over the indigenous population, or you assimilate the indigenous population. Okay, I mean, everybody in America, other than members of the First Nations, is an immigrant at one point or another.
And that is very true.
So does that qualify America as an empire? Yeah, it could be an empire because there was no indigenous, there was no indigenous people here, we completely marginalized them.
That we did. Thank you for sharing all of that. Today's episode is sponsored by Profit Answer Man Podcast. Did you know that most small business owners hate looking at their financials? It's one reason they may struggle with business success. The Profit Answer Man podcast helps them ensure they are profitable and can pay their employees and weather the storms we all have to face. It's built on the Profit First methodology of pay yourself first. The Profit Answer Man podcast is a must listen to for every small business owner and anyone who wants to help them survive and thrive. Check it out on your favorite listening platform. I kind of want to switch gears here. One of the reasons that we've kind of connected and talked a lot is with regards to the economy, the stock market, investing, and all of these different things. And you have an interesting background. You studied and became an electrical engineer here, and then you switched places and you became a chartered financial analyst. And I always find that people who have that background of engineering and finance have a very different way of looking at the world and thinking about things.
Yeah. I did go to school first to do engineering, mostly because my English skill wasn't the best at the time, and this was the mid-90s, and you know what, English is my second language, so I'll be caught dead without a spell checker these days, and automatic grammar check, but I did go toward the quantitative because it's you either get the right answer or you don't. You don't need to write an essay and discuss and talk about it per se. And yes, I went into radar engineering, and that's without getting into too detailed, it was it really a form of applied statistics. And when I decided that I wasn't gonna because that field actually put me squarely into defense technologies. So, I didn't think that I was going to go into that. So got my MBA in finance and investment management, and got my CFA charter. And it's kind of the analytical background that I have. That's sort of always is always like the perspective that I'm taking on things. So I tend to look at things. I tend to kind of, dissect things as a different modules of a machine, and trying to figure out how those machines fit together and what kind of input would create what type of a response. So yeah, I really enjoy what I do currently.
And that's what we're going to talk about for the second half. So let's start with kind of what's going on in the world right now. I've heard you say that our modern economy is essentially designed to be kind of like a balloon. We inflate it up and then we have to pop it. And it's the way the economy works, and it's the ride. So how did we come to this kind of a system?
How did we come to this kind of this system? Well, we came to this system because of World War II happened, I think. We come to the system because we had essentially fiat money. Okay. Hold on a second. I gotta pause. Hold on a second. I'm back. So modern economy. The modern economy happened when we decoupled from a commodities currency. Okay. Our modern economy is very much a consequence of how we've decided what constitutes money. And it has to do with the fact that the money isn't, quote unquote, money isn't backed up by any physical commodity, right? Remember, if money was gold, right? In the very beginning, we're talking about, this is before, this is before fiat money came about. This was the point where first it was, my gold. Okay. And then it was my gold certificate. I put it in a bank, and then I can go into, the bank and produce a certificate, and then I'll come my gold, and I can use that gold to transact. And then it became, gold as good as my, right? So as long as equivalent quality of gold, it doesn't have to be my gold, but it's some amount of gold. And then it became my representative can go into a bank with this letter to get, some amount of gold equivalent to my gold. And then it became, instead of going into the bank to get some kind of gold to do the transaction, the certificate itself became a negotiable instrument. Okay. And that happened in England. Okay. I don't quote me on this, that happened sometimes I can't remember, but I do remember that it took, that merchants were always ahead of governments, even at the time, because at the time when merchants were transacting with these gold certificates, okay, using these gold certificates and negotiable instruments for a transaction, Parliament didn't think it was legal. It wasn't. It was completely, quote unquote, illegal. Okay, and it took an act of Parliament, British Parliament, several years after, people knew that this was happening, that they quote unquote allowed this type of transaction to go on, and that was the point. Okay, where we've entered into quote unquote the modern economy, when gold certificates became legally like negotiable instruments. Okay, and basically, a couple of war happened, and then we are World War I, World War II. The rest of the world got blown back to the Stone Age, and America was the last country standing, and essentially that created the setting for the U.S. currency to dominate the world as the global reserve currency. And at that point, I think, modern economy, quote unquote, began to happen, accelerate. And when Bretton Woods finally happened, that was when Bretton Woods finally failed. That was the last vestige of trying to peg currency to gold. We were completely into this fiat economy, where essentially it's a very, very circular system. And everything that we live and breathe, okay, the economy that we are familiar with, became a consequence of sort of the global monetary system. So it's a very strange situation, but it is what we have right now. So how should people think about the market today? The markets today is very connected to one another. Okay, just like we are very connected to one another. One thing that did happen in the modern economy and as technology grew is that we became much closely linked, okay, to our neighbors. And this is my sort of analytical mind talking at this point, that there is a type of system out there where each individual component of that system is very simple. Okay, but when you put these very simple components together, okay, and because each of these very simple components are connected to multiple other components equally as simple as it, okay, arbitrarily simple, and they begin to interact with one another, the system becomes very complex and unpredictable. And that's typically people call that an emergent quality. Okay, so we have a situation where each individual ant in a ant colony is not very smart. It's actually very, 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 very simple in its behavior. But because each ant interacts with the ant next to it, and there's billions of ants, the colony becomes very smart. And that is a good analogy for the current economy, okay? Because we are intimately linked through technology, through and through chains of commerce, okay, to various components, okay. So, and that's why we see we see from a technical perspective that what we say like correlation breaks down during time of distress. What does that mean? It means that it's very difficult to hide from sort of these quote unquote tail events, these extreme events. There's no assets that is safe, quote unquote. Okay, no asset is safe because everything is literally connected with one another. So let's talk about the COVID-19, right? That's the most current crisis. When the market first started tanking, essentially in the beginning of March, what we seeing was that treasury markets were coming under distress also. Okay, now treasury markets, okay, is the deepest, most liquid market in the world. So what was happening there? Why is treasury yield going up while the equity markets are tanking? Well, how is the machine organized at the time, right? So why is the equity market tanking? Well, hedge funds were selling. Okay, well, the hedge fund, markets were tanking. Hedge funds had getting margin calls. Okay, they have to come up with the cash. Where are they going to get the cash? They're going to have to sell some assets. What assets are they going to sell? They're going to sell the safest assets. Okay, that's treasuries. So this mechanism, essentially rendered treasuries quote unquote unsafe. You thought that you were safe in treasuries? No, you weren't. Okay, treasuries being dumped to come up with the cash, to make good on the margin calls. So one thing leads to another. You have this cascade thing, and that's why the Federal Reserve had to put a stop on this cascade failure that was essentially rippling through the entire financial system, the global financial system. Okay, so we see the Federal Reserve very quickly responding very aggressively. Okay, 6 facilities right off the bat, interest rate goes to 0. And then afterwards, 2 more facilities. One of them is for Main Street and the other facility. Okay, this is really important. And this underlines the power of the US currency. That was a facility for direct transaction with foreign central banks. And most people don't realize just how powerful America is because of the special status of its currency. And and people worry about, oh my God, there's so much debt. America has so much debt. Debt is money. Okay, money is debt. A debt is an obligation to pay. Okay, if you think about this circular thing, okay. I'm going to have an IOU, and then I promise to give you something for it. And what I'm promising to give you is more IOUs. That's why on the U.S. currency, technically, it's called a Federal Reserve note. It's backed up not by gold, but by more Federal Reserve notes. Okay, so essentially, you and I can't do this. Okay, we have a credit limit, but America does not have a credit limit. Okay, not only does America not have a credit limit, the Federal Reserve has a monopoly on the production of Federal Reserve notes. Okay, think about it as anything else that you can produce. Okay, the Federal Reserve notes, the currency, is a very special product, just like your cell phone is a very special product, and there's a demand for it. And during the greatest financial crisis of our time, the world is beating down the door of America, okay, asking for the American Central Bank for more IOUs. Okay, think about that. Now that's a demand for a particular good, right? Don't think of it as currency. Think of it as just any other goods. It's like, hey, this toy is selling really hot. I got to get one for my kid. There's a demand for it. So when the world is reeling from COVID-19, from pandemic, okay, a modern day pandemic, Federal Reserve couldn't print currency fast enough. So the United States not only have to supply currency for its own economy, it has to supply currency for the rest of the world, because that's what it means to have a global reserve currency. There's demand for this. Okay, there's demand for this stuff. Okay, why? Because, the people in the world believes in America, because America is the only shop in town, right? I mean, what are you going to do? Put it in renminbi, put it in Japanese yen, okay, euro, pound sterling. You got to put it somewhere, right?
And it's interesting because I've been looking at currency exchange rates, and the dollar is essentially super powerful today in the world in regards to exchange rates. I haven't seen exchange rates like this in decades. And at the same time, we're in more debt than we've ever been. It's mind-boggling of how you can get to this place. And then the question is how do you unwind it, and how do you get out? Because I think when the Fed did that, the world changed. And I don't think people realize the world changed as far as how our economics are going to be working going forward.
Yeah, the world changed. The world is always changing, and this event certainly, made the world change a lot faster. Okay, a lot faster. We're living in a monetary economy. Okay, we're really chasing. I have a feeling that we're chasing our tails. Okay, and I'm not sure if say, how did we get to this point? We got to this point because the system kind of pushed itself toward this direction. How do we get out of it? I don't think we can get out of it per se. But I don't think, that being said, I don't think we quote unquote need to get out of it. If you think about, the flow of money as a whole, from the perspective of the central bank, the central bank, broke the rule and say, okay, we have unlimited buying of this and unlimited buying of that and whatever. And one of the things that we're going to do unlimited buying is U.S. government debt. Okay, so and that's good because the U.S. government stands ready to issue a virtually unlimited amount of debt. So you have the situation where the U.S. government issues IOUs. Okay. That goes to primary dealers and, it makes its round around the global economy, and the Federal Reserve buys those IOUs, and it ends up on the balance sheet of the Federal Reserve, and, the banker collect their bonuses and this and that and whatever. So that's the circle, right? And so Federal Reserve has the power to print more currency. Okay, so when Jerome Powell said that we're not going to run out of money, they're literally not going to run out of money because they are the source of all money. Okay, they're the source of all U.S. currency. Okay, they don't even have to print them anymore. They just make little journal entries. Okay, shifting zeros and ones around in a computer somewhere. So the question is, how is the money going to flow from an IOU from the U.S. government? How is it going to make its way through the international economy and ends up on the balance sheet of the Federal Reserve? Okay, that's the question. And where do you want to be, as these claims on future productions are being sort of flowing through the environment, the topology of the global economy. I mean, that's how I think about it. Okay, and quite frankly, in a situation like this, in a system like this, I don't think there is unwinding. Okay, I don't think you can unwind it. But as long as there is confidence that we're going to, continue this game for another day, it's going to be fine. Okay, to a certain extent, as long as, the holders of a US dollar is confident enough that they can get, a loaf of bread for the next day. Okay, as long as we don't have a disruption in the supply chain of physical goods. Okay, and I think humanity is at a point in history where we can produce whatever it is that we want to produce in however much quantity they will want it in. Okay, I don't think we're lacking any physical goods at this point. So long as we can guarantee the supply of physical goods, I don't think there's a need to unwind it. And honestly, I don't think we can unwind it if we wanted to, not the way that we organize ourselves today. Okay, so I guess in short, number one, no way to unwind it. Number two, I don't think we need to unwind it. Okay, so so that's the short of it.
So, as an individual, what risk does that put me at as a person in the economy, or even as an investor in the stock market?
This set of risks, okay, is the set of risks that you've always been exposed to. Okay, and it's always about sort of navigating the uncertainties and the risks, right? At a very practical matter, I'm at a very practical matter by my profession, is people saving for retirement and saving for college. It's the fact that you need to understand the consequences of your investment decisions. Okay, because risk is always going to be there. We always say, hey, we plan for the best and prepare for the worst. A lot of people don't prepare for the worst. Okay, and we're seeing that play out right now. Okay, I was just reading how the Airbnb, just reading yesterday how Airbnb, the entire hospitality industry, but particularly Airbnb is sort of suffering this cascade failure where people are highly levered, and if they can't rent out their room, okay, they can't pay the mortgage, and they can't pay the mortgage, okay, they're going to have a fire sale on the asset. If they have a fire sale on the asset, okay, what's that going to do to real estate prices, and what's going to happen to all the mortgage notes that are outstanding, that's collateralized, and that shows up, in our investments. So let's go, so this is another example of how things are really connected. Okay, you can't get away from this stuff.
And that's why I got hammered in 2008, because in 2008, I saw the real estate market as being overvalued. And I'm like, well, I'm not in the real estate market, so it doesn't matter. What I didn't understand was how these things are so tied together, and how the implosion of the real estate market caused my stock market portfolio to get hammered. And I think we're kind of seeing that again. You mentioned the Airbnb. At the same point, I know we've had disruptions in the price of oil, which has caused massive changes around the world as Russia and the Saudis were fighting. And then all of a sudden, there's no demand for oil. And literally, oil almost went to zero for a point.
Well, oil went negative, and you can read about the interesting mechanics. And once again, I talk about the system like a machine. I talk about it like a machine. Okay, we only know what components are connected to what other components, and how each of these components react. Okay, to the inputs and give their outputs. But we don't know what the entire system is going to do unless we actually run that simulation and see how things are gonna react. But yeah, I mean, you're right. This COVID is very very different in the sense that it was a wholesale destruction of demand. Okay, and our economy isn't so much about the stock variables. Okay, how much of this we have, how much of that we have. It's really about the flow variables of how much we're producing or what the change is. Okay. Just talk about negative oil prices, yeah, but when demand goes down. Okay, I mean, I work in the power industry for a while. Before oil turned negative, wholesale power turned negative. Okay, and why is that? Because you have to balance load with generation. Okay, you have to, when you generate the power, you got to use up the power. Okay, you can't store it. Okay, so what happened when COVID-19 hit? Factory shut it down. Okay, well, you can start shut down. So loads, you begin to lose loads. Okay, when you lose loads in the system, you're going to have to adjust the generation. Okay, well, you can shut down the turbines, and when you shut down all the turbines, you can maybe shut down the solar. Maybe you can shut down the wind. Well, you couldn't really shut down the coal, because it's a big deal to shut down a coal furnace. Okay, and you certainly can't shut down the nuclear. Okay, because and those are what we call reliability must runs. Okay, those are base load. Okay, and you can't really shut down the hydro. I mean, you can adjust it. I mean, the water is going to have to flow through those turbines, right? But you try to make this adjustment. But when you lose so much load that you can't adjust on the supply side, okay, so you have a demand and supply imbalance. Okay, what are you going to do with the excess power? You got to dump it somewhere. So we have power going negative. Okay, and then same thing with oil. Okay, a little. So power, you can, wholesale power, electricity, you can kind of adjust pretty, as far as adjusting goes, you can adjust it pretty quickly. Oil, not so much. Once you stop producing on a well, it's, questionable if you can get it back to the same efficiency when you start it again. Okay, it's a very messy process. I think at the last check, the world is still producing 100 million barrels a day, but only consuming, something like 65 million barrels a day. So all that rest has got to go somewhere, right? You can't store it in the sense that it's toxic. You'll have to. It's expensive to store, right? So we're running out of storage, right? Tankers are doing very well because they're storage, and people knows this. Like, why am I going to sell when there's no demand, right? So we got to store it. But it's expensive to store. So what happened with that oil price going negative was the fact that people were long contracts, and then you have to take delivery because the contract expired. And I'm I'm just an oil trader. I don't have storage facilities. I got to get it somewhere, so there's a fire sale and I have to, essentially pay to have it being taken away. It's kind of like that dining set that you bought for $2,000, that now is a headache. And because, I guess it wasn't, whatever, you have a problem with it now, you don't want it anymore. So it's worth zero. But then, you're going to have to pay for the junk hauling guys to take it away. So that's a negative good. Okay. I mean, that's, so it's the same set of mechanics. And we've seen this in money also. Okay. Negative interest rates, right? By the same mechanism, right? What's money for? Money's for, money's for going into the economy. Okay. For, as a means of transaction, medium of transaction, store value, the unit of account, and particularly in this case, it's the medium of transaction. So what happens when you have more mediums of transaction than there are transactions due to the destruction of demand? You have a supply and demand imbalance, so the price goes negative. So we have negative interest rates, right? Everything's connected with everything else. You can't hide from this stuff. And incidentally, savings rates has shot through the roof. Okay, American savings rates has shot through the roof. We were saving about 7.5%, and now we're like saving something like 12%. And that's the sort of one of the lessons that we learned from 2008 and Japan. They were in a deflationary environment for a very long time. Is that when interest rate goes negative, the thought process from the central bank is, okay, interest rate is going to go negative, so go out and spend it and do something with it. Don't save it. People actually save more. So there is a limit to what the central bank can do in terms of spurring demand. So we're pretty much done with the monetary side. What's left is the fiscal side. Coming out of this thing, somebody needs to spend some money. Nobody's spending right now. So we need fiscal stimulus now.
And the government's been very good about a ton of fiscal stimulus for everyone, and they're handing out money left and right to people and to business owners to kind of spur that demand and take away the fear. In doing that, how does that change the way we should think about investing going forward?
Yeah, that is very important. That given the conundrum that we're in, I think the classic helicopter drop of money is pretty critical. And in terms of where we want to be as investors, I mean it's the same process that I've been utilizing for a number of years. It's kind of like the only process around here, because it's not about the conclusion of what worked before. Okay, it's about your understanding of how the world is connected together. Okay, how various industries and sectors and blocks of economy and the international monetary system is connected together. Okay, and we know how the system behaves, and we know what is being done, and we have to kind of forecast. Okay, how will the helicopter drop? Given what we understand of how the system will respond to it, okay, change the system as it responds to it, okay, because every stimulus, actually, creates a response in the system, and the system changes. Okay, the system is always dynamic. Okay, it's not a static system. Okay, you ask yourself this question, you say, okay, so we have all of this stimulus flowing out, and we're on the cusp of a recession. And a lot of people are unemployed. There's stress on the debt markets. The Federal Reserve is very aggressive in its posturing. So that's why we see the financial assets being propped right up. Okay, and that is all due to the Federal Reserve. By the way, that is purely, I think, is purely a monetary process. Okay. So there's that bubble, okay? We talk about have that bubble pop, like 2008 was popping, and this time the Federal Reserve got so good at it that, as soon as it looked like things were going to pop, they prevented it from popping and, pumped it right back up again. Where do you want to be as an investor? Well, you kind of have to figure out where the money is going. Okay, where is the money coming from? Where is it going? Okay, it comes from from Washington D.C. It's going to go into the hands of the various pieces of the private economy, and it's going to make itself back onto the balance sheet of the Federal Reserve. Okay, that's that cycle. What are your liquidity needs? What are your required rates of return? What are the individual pieces of risks that you're exposed to? This is the part where you need to put, where you need to get that spreadsheet out. Okay, you need to figure out what your bottom line is. Okay, and given what you understand, about all of this, how are you going to position? Okay, are you going to buy Tiffany's or are you going to buy Dollar General? Okay, are you going to buy, Boeing, or are you going to buy Amazon? Okay, these are the questions that you're asking, and here's the most critical thing people don't ask is like, okay, here's how I'm gonna, I understand, what it looks like, how the money is flowing. This is my risk. I'm gonna position my portfolio like this because I think this is gonna happen. Okay, and then the last question is you ask yourself is, okay, what happens if I'm wrong? Okay, that's going to be critical because you can do all of your forecasting. Okay, you can put your position on. Okay, the last piece that determines whether or not you're going to pull the trigger, on executing what you just did, on executing all these plans, okay, is what happens if you're wrong. And if you're okay with that consequence, okay, then you can execute on all of the things that we were talking about. Okay, and then this is regardless of whatever environment or economic outlook that we have. And I'll just give you an example of what we did. Back in 2011, things were really go, but interest rates were like zero. Okay, so what are you going to do for your income? What are you going to do for your dividend seeking retirees? What are you going to do for your bond exposure? Okay. So I was a portfolio manager for a trust department of a bank at the time. So bond is kind of boring in that case, right? We were coming off of the sort of a secular bull market in bonds because interest rates only been hitting down, for like the past 20 years. So, everybody thinks that bonds are doing good, but you only get to do that once because we're now at zero. So what are you going to do for yield, right? So, well, we need to leverage loans. Okay, what are leverage loans? They're senior junk bonds. Okay, the lack of not bonds. They're senior unsecured debt. Okay, they're kind of like credit card loans for companies that are financially healthy. Okay, we got some yields. Why do we do that? Well, interest rates are at zero. We're coming out of the financial crisis. Money was easy, and chances are, people are going to pay their debts. Okay, the company's going to pay their debts. So we made that we made that decision. Hey, things are going great. So Trump gets elected. Fed does the lift off. Interest rate getting a little bit expensive. We were kind of we were like watching this thing a lot closer, at the time. Okay, so this is like what 20 post 2016, right? 2017. Okay, and when we decided to get into a trade war with the world, and when we were, and the Fed has essentially, completed its liftoff and was going to lift out even more. Okay, we kind of, looked at each other and go, well, it's probably early, but we like to get out of leveraged loans because the environment doesn't look good for it anymore. Okay, so we win long duration, and we kind of cut our credit exposure on fixed income side, and we win. We reached for yield on the interest rate side because that has lifted off. So we're getting like 3.5%. And I got first thing I did is I got an email from one of my customers saying, well, why did my yield go down? So I talked about, hey, I understand that we're making you mid threes instead of mid fours. in terms of yield, and this is what we're thinking that I think interest rates are being hiked up. We're in this weird situation where global trade is coming into strain because of policy. So we don't like the risk on that anymore. Okay. Now this was important, because I didn't like the risk on that anymore. And it's not like that, I'm saying anything bad is going to happen. We didn't like the risk of that anymore. So, if I am right, I just saved you a whole lot of money. If I am wrong, you're still making, 3.25 in yield. Are you okay with that? He's like, oh yeah, okay, I'm okay with that. Okay, I'm okay with that. So now I'm looking like a genius because look what's happened to the high yield market, right? And look what's happening to the 10-year note. Okay, you better believe I look like a genius when we got like a sub 50 basis points 10-year yield. Okay, now there's that capital gains on that long duration bond portfolio. But did I know it was going to be like this? Absolutely not. Okay, but I'll entertain the idea of what happened that was wrong. Okay, and I was okay with it.
And I think that's a big part of what people should do is to think about what if I'm wrong, and because that is the thing that hurts you the most is when you make a big wrong decision, trying to recover from that is extremely difficult.
That's right. And let's talk about winners game versus losers games. Okay. There's two kind of games out there in game theory. Okay. Some games are called winners games and some games are called losers games. Okay. Winners game is the game where you want to win. If you want to win, you must be better at your opponent. Okay. You must actively win that game. So, professional tennis. Okay. Professional baseball. Okay. Any professional game where people have devoted so much skill to it and the environment is so under control that if you want to emerge as the winner, you must be the top of your game. You must actively win that game. Okay. Now let's talk about amateur tennis, amateur baseball, okay, amateur golf. Okay. Those are the situations where, you're not so good with your skill, but, you kind of know what you're doing. But if you try anything fancy, you're going to mess up because you're actually not good enough to pull off that shot. Okay. So how do you win in a game like that? And your opponent is kind of like in the same boat, right? So how do you win in a game like that? You don't try to win. You just rally the ball over the net and you try not to lose. Because if you can manage not to lose, inevitably your opponent is gonna mess up and make a mistake, and you're gonna win not because you did anything like spectacular, but because your opponent made a mistake. Okay, so that's a loser's game. Now, war is a loser's game. Okay, the victor is not victorious because they executed some kind of brilliant strategy. Yes, there is that. But there's too many elements that are unknown. Your intel isn't right. The weather isn't under your control. Okay, there's always these elements you don't control. Okay, when you don't control all of the elements that affects the outcome, okay, the winning strategy is not to make a mistake. Because there's going to be things that happen that you don't have control over. You can control when a COVID-19 happens. You can control, when the real estate bubble is going to pop or when the tech wreck is going to pop. Okay, people say valuation. Well, valuation is great, but markets are wrong longer than your liquid. Okay, so if you're going to put money, tech wreck, I think you're gonna be like 2 years too early or something. Okay, you're not going to be in business. Okay, so what happens when you're wrong? Don't make a mistake. You're absolutely right, Rocky. That the key. The long-term investment game is to fully recognize the consequences of mistakes, given what you're going to do on your strategy. And if you're okay with being that kind of wrong, if you're okay with being wrong, then you can proceed. Okay, because we're not going to worry about what happens when you're right. When you're right, everything is fine. Everybody gets paid. What happens when you're wrong? right? That's going to be the critical factor. Don't blow up. To win the game, you got to stay in the game. So yeah, don't make mistakes. That's the key to winning.
I usually ask people for an action step, and maybe the action step for people this week is to ask yourself, what if I'm wrong with the financial decisions I'm making in my investments? What
That's
if
right.
things go bad? How long can I hold out?
Am I going to be okay?
Am I going to be okay?
What are my strategies?
And yeah.
Yes, that's right. Because you don't control if it goes bad.
Correct. And one of the things I do to deal with that is to stay in cash so that I don't have to worry about it. That's a strategy.
Oh, well, yeah, you can stay in cash, and and luckily right now, I mean, there's not a whole lot of inflation eroding your purchasing power. Depending on how things go, the fastest, the most appreciated, the cash may be the best asset. But it's. That absolutely could be possible. If we're in deflation, cash more, every day. That's why we're so afraid of deflation. Okay, that's why Fed needs to gush more money and have more fiscal stimulus. We got to get that demand for oil back up. Okay, because once you get into a deflationary trap, it's very, very difficult to get out.
So one of the things that we've talked about in our conversations is average returns versus all the noise that we see in the markets. Could you explain what you meant by that?
Yeah. Yes. It's very interesting because people, you go into your generic investment analysis, or you talk to your generic investment advisor, and they're always talking about in terms of the expected return or the average return. Coming from the quantitative side, I would say that we're all focused on the wrong thing. The expected return is really what you have left after the noise has played itself out. Okay, you'll ask anybody out there, the expected return of the S&P 500 in the U.S. large cap, and it's about 7 to 8% a year. Okay, and the noise, the standard deviation. Okay, that standard deviation is basically on average how much you are expected to be wrong from your guess of what's going to happen. Okay, so your average error. Okay, something like 16, 15%. Okay, so now you don't need to have a master's degree to realize that 16 is twice 8. Okay, so you have something where the error rate, okay, the amount of error in magnitude, is twice you're expecting to see. Okay, so you tell me whether or not you should be focusing on the bigger number. Okay, and we've seen this kind of in layman term, in the sense that if you remove like the top 10 days, okay, all of your return goes to zero. If you're and that was sort of presented as you want to stay in the market. Yes, but quite frankly, that should also say to you that it is in fact the deviations from expectation that fundamentally shapes the outcome, and not the expectation that shapes the outcome. So for me as an investment manager, I am very much focused on the noise, and the signal will work itself out. And incidentally, this work itself out over 2 business cycles relative to all other assets. So that's what I meant. That in depending on what your time horizon is, you need to be more cognizant of the noise than you are of the signal, quote unquote, the expected return. Yeah, so that's what I meant.
And how long is a business cycle?
It's about 7 years, and I say on average. It's a very flexible term. The time doesn't, quote unquote, time doesn't happen in a linear fashion in the financial markets, but there are these. It's kind of like we have winter, spring, summer and fall, and we have the seasons. And they are sort of connected to one another. It's just that sometimes, spring is like 12 months or summer is like, 6 months, so it's like, if I was, if I didn't have a, calendar, if I see the leaves turning yellow, I was coming along. So there are these signs that you will see in the in the marketplace is like, well, if interest rates are high and the Federal Reserves are hiking rates, you're kind of saying, oh, the leaves are turning yellow, the fall is coming, and then winter follows. 7 years has been on the average, but you're really looking for these indicators, these fundamental indicators, to see where in the business cycle.
So one of the things you said is it's 2 business cycles for an average, which if it's 7 years, that's 14 years. I know this last cycle's been at least 10 years of growth. So you could be looking at a 15 or 20 year cycle where, yes, you could get average returns, but it may be a long time. And so people need to be aware of their time horizons when they make these types of decisions.
That's right.
And so let's talk about kind of another long-term trend. I've heard you say to me, labor's been losing and capital is increasing. What did you mean?
Yeah. So, putting my economist hat on, okay, there's this concept of return to labor or return to capital. Is labor and capital is sort of, fundamentally 2 ways that, 2 factors that 2 inputs to production, right? You can have capital in terms of machines, okay, or you can have labor in terms of, just people slugging away, right? One of the reasons why America has been able to outperform the rest of the world is because of America's investment into capital. So you got one guy, just one singular person operating, multi-million-dollar satellite guided piece of equipment, with various sensors on it. And then that person, is more productive than, a team of, a couple hundred guys with pickaxes. Right. So that's that's the difference between a developed world and a emerging world. But the trend that we're seeing is that since the 70s, since the petroleum embargo hit America, the return to labor, okay, wage growth, that hasn't really been keeping up. That's one of the reasons why a lot of Americans are struggling. It's the fact that the prosperity that is experienced by the aggregate America, as measured by GDP, wasn't shared equally between the people who worked and between between those who host ownership over the capital. So that's what I meant. That the wealth creation has mostly come from appreciation of asset prices, stock prices, property prices. So if you weren't an asset owner, okay, if you weren't quote unquote a capitalist in the sense that you were an owner of capital, okay, you were a laborer, okay, you did not participate in the majority of the prosperity that essentially happened, for many decades, and that was what globalization did. It really put return toward capital instead of labor.
And even if you are a laborer, if you don't spend all your money and you save it, you essentially build capital. And if you let the compound curve work over time, you also can enjoy the fruit of capital, but you've got to create your own capital.
Oh, absolutely. You have to, you want to talk about theory. That's the initial capital gathering phase, right? You have to consume less than what you're bringing in, right? And then you have to amass that capital, or you have a brilliant business plan and you convince some banker to shift some zeros and ones around, and all of a sudden you have money in your checking account to start your business, right? That's capital.
And more often than not, when they do that, in a couple of years they shift them again on you, and then you have no capital in your bank account.
Yeah, it depends. See, so therein lies what we were talking about before. We're in a monetary economy, right? So what gives me the ability to convince banker XYZ to shift those journal entries around to magically create money into the economy, right? That's how money creation happens, right? I want to build a factory, I want to build, whatever, can I convince my banker to make money appear in my checking account so I, get my operation going, right?
And one of the easiest ways, I think, for people to do that is through real estate, because bankers, for whatever reason, like to create capital for real estate. And that's how a lot of small people have been able to build up large fortunes without a ton of capital.
Well, absolutely. You're right. In fact, the prosperity of America, and I mean like the prosperity of America relative to the rest of the world in the secular sense, as in after World War II, it absolutely has everything to do with the capital markets, and the mortgage market is one of the engines that drives growth for this country. The agency debt. The various mortgages that is tied directly to property prices and valuation in this country. It is because that, individuals like you and I could essentially collateralize the next 30 years of our earning, okay, and get a loan today, right, from the bank, secured by our property and our, ability to pay. Right. And then those, millions of Americans would do this, and all of those mortgages would get pulled together and diced up and then, repackaged into, this and that, and, being sold to pension funds, investors, which is really us in aggregate. Right. We collectively own our mortgages. Right. It speaks to the connected nature of everything. And it absolutely is the engine of growth, for America. And because that we have the global reserve currency, the engine of growth for the world.
And that's very true. So with China, how should the United States look at China and the relationships? What should people think about China?
Oh, yes. What should people think about China? China and America. Well, Americans has to decide what type of role that the Chinese play. Okay, like, are they a partner? Are they a competitor? Are they an opponent? Right? America has to decide, what China is, because and that's going to drive the overall strategy. All right. But as far as China is concerned, okay, American society versus Chinese society, American values versus Chinese values. Okay, when you're just talking at the people level, okay, it's you and I, just regular people. Okay, that's very much the same. Okay, we care about families, we care about our jobs, we care about our future. We love our kids and we love our parents, and we like good food and we like to kick back and relax and have fun. That's the same. But the institutions are very different. Okay. And an institution in terms of society, that's like an engine in a car. Okay. You can tune an engine in a car to have peak output at a specific RPM range. Okay. And just like you can tune an engine, you can tune the laws of an economy, of a society, to benefit the many in the long run or benefit the few in the short run. And depending on how you tune it, that's going to have very different consequences for both the society at large, those who are, quote unquote, that have the power, and those who don't, the peasantry, the people, common people like you and I. So how has America tuned its engine, right? What is the American society interested in? Okay, well, you look at it's full employment and stable prices, right? You look at the dual mandate, right? The pursuit of life, liberty, and happiness, right? That's the American value system. Okay, so the American society hopefully is tuned to achieve that. Now, what is the Chinese value system, right? Well, Chinese value system in a word can be wrapped up as being having stability. And that stability, is very different than American stability. It is really stability, what we call stability under the heavens, or rather stability for the emperor. Okay. So basically, there is, the Chinese is completely governed, dominated by the ruling class in China. Okay, and then there is a singular focus for the Chinese ruling class, and that is to maintain power, okay, at any cost necessary. The Chinese has been doing that for 7,000 years. We've been so regularly at it that the Western world has even came up a name for what it is that the Chinese are doing. They call it the dynastic cycle. Okay, cycle implies regularity, and yes, there has been it's been very regular. Okay, regardless of whether some regime lasts 300 years or 30 years. The cycles of the regimes are the same. It's kind of like that seasonal analogy that I made about the economy. So the Chinese emperor doesn't care about his people. Okay, to the extent that as long as he stays in power, it doesn't really matter. Okay, since 1949, the tacit understanding between the Chinese ruling class, the emperor, and his peasantry is that you let me stay in power so long as I put food on your table. Okay, and you can look this up in Chinese history, that so long as there are food on the table of the peasantry, there has never been a revolt. Okay. But the flip side is that as soon as food stops showing up on the tables of the peasantry, a revolt has always happened. Okay, so basically, it's a situation where can the Chinese ruling class, in its corruption and whatnot, in its sort of self-centered activities, can it at least guarantee a food supply for the population? Okay, so as long as there's food, everything's okay. And food lately, okay, in the past 50 years, has become like, do we have jobs? Do we have economic growth? Okay, that's food for the Chinese peasantry. So China must grow economically. Okay, if the emperor is going to stay in power. Okay, because as soon as the factory stops, cranking out whatever it is that they're cranking out, you're going to have 2 billion very angry laborers taking to the streets. Okay, and that speaks to the relationship between America and China in terms of the economics. Okay, so it is a very good deal for Americans, and I'll tell you why. All right. So on the one hand, America absolutely should be aware of Huawei, okay? Because I call Huawei the commercial wing of the PLA. We can go into that later, but yes, China is powered by state-owned entities, and whenever you're sort of competing with a Chinese company, you may actually be competing with the Chinese government. All right, so just be aware of that, and the insidiousness is that. The Chinese looks like the American economy from the outside, but as soon as you go about a couple millimeters in, okay, it looks very much different. And the systematic risks is that the more or less the free market economies of the Western world has now completely entangled itself, with this autocracy that looks superficially like a market economy. But the deal is still very good for America, is the fact that the Chinese gets to slave away every day building physical products for the Americans. Okay, why do they do that? Because the emperor has to have that happen, or the people are going to revolt. All right, so now they can't collateralize the next 30 years of their earnings. Okay. To take out, to buy property with it. Okay, vast majority of the Chinese laborers can't. Okay, why? Well, that's because they can't even guarantee their earning for the next 30 days. Okay, so not nearly as stable. Okay, as the Americans. Okay, so they couldn't do that, and the Chinese property law looks very different. Property laws looks very different. Okay, so they have to slave away essentially. Making widgets for somebody, not themselves, because they don't have the money to consume it. Okay, not in the sense that that in the amount of goods that America can consume. All right, Americans are professional consumers for the rest of the world. All right, so the Chinese are slaving away. They're making widgets. They have to sell it to somebody. Americans are happy to buy that. Okay, we're more than happy to buy it. So there's the trade deficit. Okay, so now what they don't tell people, on Main Street is that what Americans do for that is to just print out little green thingies. Okay, we call U.S. dollars Federal Reserve notes, and we hand it over to the Chinese, and the Chinese are happy to accept those. Okay, and then they turn around with these little green paper thingies, and they want to buy things in America, right? So what do you suppose the Chinese wants to buy in America? Oh, Lockheed Martin would be nice. Northrop Grumman would be nice. Raytheon missile system would be very nice. But guess what? Congress says you can't buy it. Of course you can't buy it. Okay, you can't buy America's technology. I mean, that's not good for that's not good for national security. So there go back to that question: what role do you want China to play? Right? Are they a partner, or are they a competitor? Are they an opponent? Right? So at least Congress sees China as an opponent, which, is likely to be right. So Chinese has about 4 trillion of these, green thingies sitting in their bank, and Congress wouldn't sell anything that they want to buy. You remember when you were a kid, and then, you do the work, and then you make you get your allowance, and then you want to buy things, and your parents say, no, you can't spend the money on that. You can't buy that. Okay, that's that situation. Okay, you can't buy that. No, you cannot buy Lockheed Martin. Okay, you may not buy Boeing. Okay, you may buy government debt. You may buy IOUs from the White House. Okay, so when so one of the reasons why when America government borrows money, we get a sub 50 basis point 10-year. All right. And when Putin borrows money, he has to pay like 20%. Okay. So you have a situation where the Chinese are slaving away by the virtue of the fact that how they've chosen to organize their society, okay, to benefit the Americans in return for the American currency, which they then turn around and finance our fiscal policies. It's a very good deal. Okay. And quite frankly, I'm not interested in picking a trade fight in the traditional sense, because if I put on, I'm wearing my American hat, and that's the dual mandate of the central bank: stable prices and high employment. Okay, I'm perfectly happy letting the Chinese slave away under this agreement for us. Okay, so that's how the Americans should look at the Chinese. And it's not that the Americans are doing it to the Chinese. It's the fact that the Chinese are doing it to themselves. We just happen to be in the neighborhood.
Very interesting. It's time to learn the secrets of life. What's your secret to living an abundant life?
To forget everything that I learned in economics class. And I do believe this with my whole heart, that in fact, scarcity is a man-made concept.
Interesting.
Yeah. Yep. My professors would shoot me right now. Yeah, I got a master's in quantitative economics. I'm the first one to tell you that scarcity is a invented concept. Of course, I did have a very long conversation with an Episcopal priest, and after years of of introspection, I came back and I told her, you're right. Scarcity, in fact, is a created concept.
What did you learn later in life that you wish you would have learned sooner?
Trust my guts. Trust your guts. Don't second judge yourself. Don't overthink it. We're all very smart in our own ways. Don't let anybody tell you that you're not good enough. You are. You just need to believe that you are, and don't give up.
And that's true. I think, being immigrants, we have to go through that, don't we? Because you're an outsider. And so that's a big part of coming to America.
Yeah.
If you were to give an 18-year-old one specific piece of wisdom, what would it be?
Enjoy the moment. Be fully present to where you are today. And open your heart to the possibility that life has to offer. Don't be so sure of what you want, okay, that you're not willing to accept something better.
And I think too often at 18, we have no idea what we want. We just do what we're told.
Yeah. Well, sometimes you say, I want this, I want to do this, I want to do that. I want to be an electrical engineer just to prove that I could. Okay. I came out and asked, what's the hardest thing that I could do? And they said electrical engineering. I was like, that's for me. Okay. What's the hardest electrical engineering they can do? Microwave, sub-millimeter wave radar antenna design. I have no idea what it is, but it sounds like that's for me. I want to prove that I could do it. Then I find out that I really didn't want to do it because it was for defense. And, I realized as I was interviewing at Lockheed Martin, okay, that probably going into American defense as a Chinese was not a good idea. That's how I went for my MBA.
Smart move, but at least the bases are good for you.
Oh, yeah. Well, yeah. Call it an applied statistics degree.
If people would like to find you and connect, what's the best way for them to do that?
Yeah, you can find me on LinkedIn. You can look my name up, David Luo, on BrokerCheck.
Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you, Rocky. It has been an absolute pleasure.
Let's remember, just because we are a consumer nation doesn't mean you have to live a consumer lifestyle. The faster you find joy in yourself and not through stuff, the easier this becomes and the wealthier you become. I enjoyed how David says scarcity is not real. And be present in this moment and think about what's better. He also has a very interesting take on China and how we should view that country. This week's action step is, what if I'm wrong with the financial decisions I'm making? The question you have to ask yourself is, can you live with those and how does it affect your lifestyle? I've been working through this one for the past 18 months. With markets at all-time highs in both stocks and bonds, high unemployment, the end of a business cycle, this becomes the million-dollar question. I'm not a financial planner, but David is. If you need to have a financial conversation, call him. He knows more about this than the majority of people in the industry, because he was doing this for very large institutional investors. He's not a salesperson. He's actually someone who understands these markets at a very deep level. Between his expertise in building radar systems and being able to pick out the signal from the noise in his engineering mindset, he can really help you put together a plan. So, what's preventing you from moving forward, and who are you putting on your team to help build the life you deserve? Taking no action creates a far worse outcome in life than trying something and failing. I can help you achieve your goals through coaching and accountability. Just email me and we can start with a short chat to see if we're a good fit. For many people, one session allows them to take a giant leap forward towards their dreams. You can always get me at rocky@richardsoul.com or use the scheduling link in the show notes. I'd love to hear how you're doing and how the information I've shared has helped. Thanks for listening. Have an abundant week.